It was supposed to be a quiet, emotional day. Just me, my wife, and a few close friends helping move our son's things into our lake cabin while he was away on deployment. We wanted to surprise him with a peaceful space to come home to. Something that felt like a true retreat after everything he's been through. But the moment the HOA president spotted the moving truck, everything took a turn. She stormed over, phone already in hand, shouting about unauthorized activity and violations, even though we weren't breaking any rules. Next thing we knew, blue and red lights were flashing at the end of our gravel driveway as officers stepped out and tried to make sense of the situation. I realized something. This wasn't about rules, it was about control. Over the years, the HOA had pushed boundaries, made up policies on the fly, and targeted families like mine who just wanted a little peace. But calling 911 on a family moving their soldier son's belongings, that was the last straw. The officer looked confused as we explained what we were doing. The neighbors started gathering, whispering, some shaking their heads. My blood was boiling, but I kept calm, knowing this time things were going to change. I had a plan, and by the end of the weekend, the HOA wouldn't just regret calling the cops. They'd be completely banned from our property for good. What happened next left the whole neighborhood speechless. The thing is, this wasn't the first time the HOA had stepped out of line. Ever since we bought the lake cabin 3 years ago, they'd treated us like outsiders. Every little thing became an issue. Our flagpole was too tall. The mailbox color was off standard. And even the sound of our grandson's laughter one summer afternoon was reported as a noise disturbance. We tried to follow the rules, stay friendly, and avoid conflict. But they weren't interested in cooperation. They were looking for control. The president, Diane, was especially persistent. She acted like she owned the entire neighborhood. I had caught her on our property more than once, peeking around, snapping photos, and muttering about violations. It got to a point where my wife started keeping a notebook just to document all the nonsense. Still, we never expected it would get this far. That Saturday morning, while we were unloading boxes labeled uniforms and gear, Diane appeared out of nowhere. She didn't ask questions, didn't offer a greeting, just launched into a rant about how moving trucks weren't allowed without advance notice. We explained that this wasn't just any move. This was for our son, a deployed soldier, and this was his home now too. She didn't care. Within minutes, she was on the phone with 911, claiming suspicious activity on HOA grounds. As the deputy looked around, clearly puzzled by the call, I could tell even he sensed something was off. But what he didn't know was this call had triggered something much bigger. The deputy asked Diane to step aside so he could talk to me privately. His tone was calm, but I could tell he was annoyed. "Sir," he said, "you mind telling me what's going on here?" I explained everything, how we were setting up the cabin for our son's return from deployment, how everything we were doing was on our private property, and how the HOA had been escalating their behavior for months. As I spoke, I could see him glancing at the boxes marked Army and Personal. His face changed a bit, maybe a little respect. Maybe a little disbelief that someone would actually call 911 over this. Meanwhile, Diane was pacing near the driveway, still on her phone, probably calling the HOA board members or whoever would. Listen, a few neighbors had come out to watch, some with arms crossed, others clearly uncomfortable. One neighbor, Carl, walked over quietly and said, "They did something similar to me last year when my daughter moved in for the summer. They just don't like people who don't fall in line." That stuck with me. Turns out, Diane had been trying to get a new rule passed that gave the HOA more control over who could temporarily occupy homes. She wanted permission slips for families staying more than 2 weeks, even if they were blood relatives. That explained a lot. But what Diane didn't realize was that my wife had been collecting copies of every notice, every complaint, and even audio recordings. We weren't just frustrated. We were ready by Sunday afternoon, The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Diane had rallied to other HOA board members, and now they were parked across the road, clipboards in hand, watching us like hawks. Every time we moved a box or set a piece of furniture on the porch, they scribbled something down. It stopped feeling like a neighborhood and started feeling like a surveillance zone. But what they didn't know was that we were recording everything: tight security cameras, cell phone footage, even audio. My wife had saved every ridiculous notice and had built a timeline showing how their so-called enforcement always seemed to target families with out-of-town relatives, veterans, and people who didn't attend their monthly meetings. It wasn't about rules, it was about power. That night, I got a call from our son overseas. I didn't tell him everything, but he could hear something in my voice. "Dad, is everything okay?" I told him not to worry, that we were just getting his space ready. But I made a quiet promise right then I wouldn't let him come home to this kind of mess. The next morning, things escalated fast. We woke up to a notice taped across our cabin's front door: "Cease unauthorized use, HOA enforcement pending." That was it. They were trying to claim our private cabin as part of their HOA jurisdiction, even though it sat just outside their official boundary. I looked at my wife. She nodded. It was time to act on everything we had. Just as we were gearing up to fight back with the documentation we'd collected, an unexpected envelope showed up in our mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just a folded letter slipped into a plain white envelope. Inside was a copy of a so-called amendment to the HOA bylaws marked with a date from 6 months ago. It claimed that any properties within 500 feet of the lake, regardless of boundary lines, could be brought under HOA oversight if deemed necessary for community uniformity. It was signed by Diane and 2 other board members. The problem: that amendment wasn't legal. The HOA had no authority to change their jurisdiction without a vote from all homeowners, something we and many others had never been notified of. Worse, the signatures looked suspicious. My wife pulled out our folder of records and found an older email thread where Diane herself admitted that the cabin property had never been part of HOA territory. This wasn't just overreach, was falsification. That same day, we got word that Diane had submitted a formal complaint to the county accusing us of violating zoning ordinances by housing unauthorized individuals and modifying lakefront structures without permits. We hadn't touched the lake, and everything done to the cabin was by code. Still, the county now had to look into it. Suddenly, this wasn't just about HOA drama anymore. It was legal, it was personal, and it was clear they weren't just trying to control us. They were trying to bury us in paperwork, hoping we'd give up. But they were wrong. The county investigator showed up 2 days later, quiet and professional. He walked the property with a clipboard, asked a few questions, and reviewed our permits and records. My wife handed him the folder we'd kept: every letter, every photo, and even the audio files of Diane threatening us with consequences if we didn't comply. He didn't say much, just nodded and took notes. But before leaving, he said something I'll never forget. "This isn't the first time I've heard complaints about your HOA. You did the right thing documenting everything." 2 days after that, the investigator called to confirm what we already knew: our property was not under HOA jurisdiction. The fake amendment was invalid, and the HOA had no right to place notices, file complaints, or interfere with our use of the cabin. As for the zoning claims, cleared. Every modification we made was fully permitted and up to code. Diane and her board had officially overstepped. We posted a copy of the county's decision on our front gate with a polite sign: "Private property, non-HOA jurisdiction." But that wasn't the final twist. Later that week, a neighbor quietly handed me something: a printed email chain between Diane and the other board members. In it, they openly discussed targeting non-compliant owners like us, using vague rules to pressure them into selling. They'd even bragged about driving 3 families out already. That was it. We brought the emails to a lawyer. What started as a petty power grab was about to become a full-blown investigation. The lawyer didn't waste time. With the evidence, we'd collected Diane's fake amendment, the county's ruling, and now the internal emails. He filed a formal complaint with the state's Homeowner Association Oversight Division. Within weeks, an investigator was assigned, and things moved fast. Diane and the board were called in for questioning, and suddenly their smug confidence disappeared. Several neighbors came forward too, sharing stories of intimidation and forced sales they had kept quiet about. It was all finally coming to light by the end of the month. The HOA board was ordered to cease all actions against properties outside their original boundary. Diane was forced to resign, and the remaining board members were warned about any future abuse of authority. Our property was officially recorded with the county as non-HOA, with a permanent exemption from their oversight. We even posted a legal boundary marker to make it crystal clear.